Good evening, everyone that is watching on TIR, and good evening to everyone watching on Varn Vlog, and of course, good morning to those that will watch this or listen to this later. I'm your host, Jason Myles, on another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It's a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you're a returning listener or patron, so glad to have you back. Also, don't forget to check our latest feature, The Crisis Papers, different articles on a wide variety of topics. I think y'all will dig it. I worked long and hard on the layout. It's free for all patrons that are on the Teenage Anarchist tier and above. The 5th issue is out now. Second time around. Musings on how we got another administration of Donald Trump. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there's links in the description to that. And after the show tonight, we will be going to the champagne room. If you want access to the champagne room, guess what? You can get it for free. What? Free, Jay? Oh, yes. Yes. You can get a free 7-day trial. Have access to champagne rooms past and present. Will we do a movie night during that 7 days? I don't know. But for 7 days, you'll have access to the champagne room and access to all past and present champagne rooms. So again, wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there's a link in the description to become a patron and try it out for 7 days. Now, the matter at hand, rules-based order or MAGAfest destiny? I have to admit, I didn't coin that. Cuba coined that, and it's really funny. Joe Biden entered the presidency after 4 tumultuous years under Donald Trump. Trump's tenure was marked by a cascade of polarizing events: the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, the targeted assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, a trade war centered on tariffs, significant tax cuts for the wealthy, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. While Trump didn't cause the global outbreak, his administration's response was widely criticized as inadequate and chaotic. For many, Biden's election offered a reprieve, a promise to steer the United States back towards a semblance of normalcy and reestablish a rules-based order on the world stage. Yet, as we've seen, the story is more complicated than that. Biden campaigned on the idea of restoring America's global reputation, emphasizing diplomacy and multilateralism over Trump's unpredictable, ego-driven foreign policy. However, the reality of Biden's actions have often contradicted his rhetoric. Take the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. It not only marked the end of America's longest war, but also dealt a severe blow to Biden's credibility as a competent steward of U.S. foreign policy. And while the U.S. loudly touts the principle of a rules-based order, it simultaneously undermines those rules when convenient. For instance, Biden's administration ordered the targeted killing of al-Qaeda leader, I'm going to try to say this right, Ayman al-Zawahiri via a drone strike, an act of extrajudicial execution that exemplifies the selective application of international norms. America's unwavering support of Israel, even as its military actions in Gaza are widely regarded as acts of genocide, exposes the double standards at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. The language of self-defense has become a euphemism to justify acts that, if committed by other nations, would unequivocally condemned as war crimes. The Washington consensus remains clear. We will use force wherever we want, whenever we want, however we want, and no international court can hold us accountable. One wonders if the Department of Defense shouts, "Stop resisting," before launching yet another drone strike that claims the lives of innocent civilians. You can almost hear the Imperial March playing as Donald Trump returns once again to the White House like Vader on the second Death Star. With his return to the White House, Trump's madman tactics have reemerged, and they're more theatrical than ever. His calls to seize the Panama Canal, take Greenland by military force if need be, and annex Canada as the 51st state underscore his willingness to embrace absurdity, to dominate the news cycle, galvanize his base. Trump's approach is not merely a rejection of the rules-based order, but an all-out assault on the very notion of rules themselves. In this MAGAfest destiny, America's global strategy is driven less by coherent policy and more by spectacle and unilateralism. So join us on This is Revolution as we dissect the unraveling of the rules-based order and explore what a MAGAfest destiny might mean for the future of global politics. Let's bring in the crew coming in all the way live from Miami, Florida. He is my homie, my dog. He's the man of the man hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Myles, and Happy New Year to ya.
Oh, that's right. It's been a minute. I mean, we said Happy New Year outside of the show, but Happy New Year to you as well. How is it in Florida? It's very windy here.
It's not bad. The weather has not been bad. It's been cold in the morning, but cold for us is a relative statement.
Fair enough. Also, speaking of the cold, this man, speaking of the second Death Star, that's where he had his first big birthday party. Please welcome Deep State Cuba.
Happy New Year to everyone. Happy New Year, Pascal, Jason, assorted ne'er-do-wells of the TIR chat world. And I mean, it's getting a little personal here with in some ways, right? Like, this is kind of the realest it gets for Canada, because typically we're not the ones getting threatened with American military force. But now we've joined a very large and illustrious club.
You and the Mexicans?
Well, you know, half of Africa, all of the Middle East, most of Latin America, Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia.
Do you think that's why Trudeau stepped down? He was like, I can't do this with Trump. He's got photos that I didn't even show you guys.
He's sitting on the CIA blackface archive. The Trudeau was a long time going, and I think that after a couple of years of conservative governance here, we may yet miss him. But I can't imagine that the prospect of having to deal with Donald Trump as president made him want to linger any longer than he possibly had to, right? Like, it would be one thing if you're hanging out with like the Biden cronies, but if you got to deal with petulant 8-year-old with nuclear codes acting like they're the boss of the hemisphere, if not the world, then yeah, that's kind of peace out moment.
Well, we also have to bring in the last person on the panel, the anchor leg, if you will, which is the strongest leg in a relay race. Please welcome Derek Moore.
Yeah. We would come in on a day where I can't make the joke about finishing the War of 1812 anymore because it might actually happen.
Your threats are no longer idle.
Well, let me ask you guys the first question, and we'll start with Pascal Robert, since this is his first time back. To what extent has the U.S. ever genuinely adhered to a rules-based order versus using it as a rhetorical device to maintain global hegemony? I'll take my answer off here.
Well, this is the thing, though. I mean, I think that the United States, as the center of global hegemony, does have rules that it adheres to. The question is, are those rules dictated by other foreign powers? I think that there are internal mechanisms that the hierarchy of American empire usually use to facilitate how they govern and have governed foreign policy since the advent of the post-World War II global liberal order that has centered largely on the United States as the hegemon of record in the world. Even though we did have the NATO alliance that was during the Cold War designed to thwart the advances of the Soviet Union, largely pretty much since World War II, the United States has been at the fulcrum of geopolitics on the planet. And I would argue that there have been rules that have governed how those powers would be dictated in the affairs of the world. Now, just because there are rules doesn't mean that I agree with those rules, and it doesn't mean that I think that those rules are fair based on fair or just principles. I would argue that usually those rules are based on a preservation of capitalist hierarchy, realpolitik, geostrategic avenues of thoroughfares that are of particular importance, and an overall hierarchy of goals of achievement that have been necessary for the maintenance of American empire and its corporate acolytes. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a fair system to people of the global south and the countries that do not have the ability to maintain the 800 some odd foreign bases that we have in the United States. So to answer your question more directly, I think the United States has always had rules since its rise as a global hegemon. But at the same time, those rules are internal to its own mechanisms and not something that work to the advantage of other powers.
Derek Varn, I'll pass it to you.
The rules-based international order is, a nice word for saying the shit the British Empire did that America inherited after World War II. Which is not to say that there wasn't rules and that we haven't violated them. The rules-based international order that we pretty much maintained after Bretton Woods started being undone as early as the 1970s in financial spaces and in the mid to late 1990s in the precursor to the War on Terror and geopolitical military ones. If we are to take Trump's recent announcements seriously, and we can talk about whether or not we are, that's a whole different ball game. And I think things are going to be a lot more interesting domestically than people think. By that, I mean, there's already fractures in the Trumpist movement showing up immediately. But let's just black that out for a second. Today, he announced the creation of the External Revenue Service, the ERS, which he will supposedly put into place on January 25th. We haven't had a new dumb international apparatus since George Bush and the Department of Homeland Security, which people need to remind yourselves is not actually that old. It started right after 9/11. A few other things we have to deal with is if he's serious about the annexation of Greenland and a few other things, there are some things to be looking out for, because that means that he really doesn't care about completely disbarring NATO, which would be a massive shift in the quote rules-based international order. It's the kind of one we haven't seen since World War II. But it's hard to know what to take seriously from him. I remember his policy papers in 2016. I used to read them. He released plenty. He didn't do most of them. Things that I think we can see that's going to be interesting is how much is the Republican Senate going to go along with him, considering the leader of the Senate is still non-Trump loyalist. John Thune is not a Trump loyalist. We don't know what Capitol really wants. I mean, we've seen the tech bros get all switch which ring they were kissing. We should all remind ourselves that they were all kissing a different ring as little as 4 years ago. Finance Capital was seen as hostile to the GOP after a lot of the stuff that happened under Trump 1, and that seems to have all been evaporated. So someone asked, what's the connection between acquiring Greenland and disbanding NATO? Denmark is a NATO member, and you're threatening military action against a NATO member. It would effectively dissolve the alliance. Just pointing that out. There's a lot that this would actually indicate. It is a return to the Truman Doctrine, pretty hardcore actually, which is a traditional American doctrine, one that often gets called isolationist, but really is just, multipolar imperial. Because as I've been saying since about 2007, multipolarity actually implies something like the 19th century, not something new. But it will require a complete rewriting of the quote rules-based international order, unquote, whatever the fuck that is. But that unraveling's been slow going for a long time. That's really my primary point. I'd love to hear what a non-American has to say about this, but I mean, it does seem weird to be threatening a fairly integrated North America with chaos at a particular juncture, when you're also seemingly pivoting away from Europe. But we have to look at that. And the other two things we have to look at, that's kind of discrediting and I haven't heard enough about, Trump apparently did do the whole Nixon to China thing on Gaza. I was watching Israeli news this afternoon and they were complaining on Israeli news in Hebrew. And since I can listen to Hebrew, I can tell you what they were saying, that they think Trump betrayed them in forcing a capitulation without a whole lot of benefit to them on the Gaza situation and the next 24-hour ceasefire, which is interesting because that would imply that the Dems really could have done it the entire time, but lack the political will and or capital. So you're gonna have a lot to deal with in looking through what all this stuff implies. But I mean, talking about the rules-based international order, I mean, like, really, there was a decision point that could have been made to go back to it after the Bush administration, under the Obama administration, and Obama chose not to. We're dealing with the repercussions of that now.
I think that it would be useful to distinguish between a couple of different things that might get otherwise conflated. There's this liberal internationalist, and liberal in a good way, foreign policy vision for something like United Nations, or before that, the League of Nations, some kind of quasi-world federation or government where disputes are settled through discussion, consultation, where there are regular, predictable channels for dispute resolution among countries, and where communication, international law, some other types of there's a regular foundation for international exchange from the government level all the way down to sending the mail and getting it to your friend in Laos, being able to visit your family on the other side of the world, whether they're in New Guinea or Old Guinea. And it's a hopeful vision. There's a reason why it resonates positively with a lot of people. That's the world that we were kind of promised after World War II. And there are organizations which backstop this international cooperation, some that have worked better than others. The fact that regular mail can be delivered from any country in the world to any country in the world, if you think about it, is a logistical and organizational achievement. It's a milestone of global integration. The universal adoption of passports and visas for international travel, these are components of a global rules-based order which allows for not just heads of state, but everybody to participate in life beyond the borders of the country they happen to be born in. So there's that. And there's the most optimistic vision that you can build that out into a system which allows everyone around the world to live in peace and to interact in ways that maintain mutual respect and that are regular and predictable and stable. the highest aspiration might be using the United Nations as intended, as a forum for international dispute resolution, with countries recognizing UN sanctions or UN resolutions, including the major powers. That's not the world we're living. That's not the world we live in, but that would be the highest form, the highest expression of this, not only liberal, but certainly liberal in origin aspiration for mankind. Then there's what Pascal has described as the internal rules through which American hegemony operates. And since the end of World War II, the United Nations has sometimes been useful to the operation of American hegemony, and sometimes it's been an obstacle. And we see the ebb and flow of the relevance and prominence of the UN in American culture following that utility. After the end of the Cold War, there was this hope that that liberal aspiration might be achieved, that instead of Cold War security politics, you might have international multilateralism serving as the foundation for global affairs. But instead, American imperialism, American hegemony co-opted the rules that were useful, co-opted the structures that were useful, reoriented things like the EU as a tool of Western expansion, maintained and even expanded NATO, despite the fact that the existential threat of the USSR was no longer there, and projected power in an unabashed, unembarrassed way, even creating this quasi-gulag-style archipelago of black sites, torture centers, and military bases all over the world, many of which were kept secret even from the United States public and the host governments where they operated. Now, that limited structure for the operation of American hegemony. So it's going to be power. It's got everybody do what America says, but at least there's some regularity. At least things like borders are inviolable. You know, we'll change the government on the other side of the border if we don't like it, but we won't move around the border posts. We're going to impose one-sided trade agreements that benefit the United States, that benefit certain sectors of the United States most of all, but we're not going to cheat on our obligations in the trade agreements, things like that. That minimum level can no longer be taken for granted. As Varn pointed out, one of the key institutions of American hegemony is the NATO alliance. But if America is threatening its own NATO allies, then that alliance becomes meaningless to anybody who believed themselves to be protected by it. After all, you join NATO because you don't want to be invaded. You believe that the invasion, that the threat was always going to come from the East, but just because it comes from the West doesn't make it any less coercive. And many European states, many American allies, have gone along with American hegemony, believing that that was an alternative to being the victim of direct American coercion. If Canada, which has been carrying water for the United States for a very long time, which has been a very, very well-behaved ally and neighbor, if Canada can be threatened with annexation, if it can be reduced to the 51st state, then what guarantee is there for anyone? And maybe we should start talking to other powers. So I think that there is a substantial shift in having a president that's willing to shred all of the very limited internal requirements that American hegemony had on the hegemon, and shift to a system of arbitrary coercion.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
How did Biden's foreign policy reflect continuity with what Trump's doing now, despite their surface level differences?
Domestically, actually, quite a bit. I think the international orders where things maybe get a little bit different. I mean, we saw, for example, leftists were concerned about kids in cages until 2020, and then they all forgot about it magically overnight. But we also see that even in terms of policy, in that all but 9 of the Democratic senators cited to empower Trump for his ICE raids and to fund it, meaning that the consensus among the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party was to get behind the ball on that. Where things seem different is this international stuff, because what Trump is saying has effects. I mean, and when I talk about effects, I don't just mean, you know, I mean, even if we don't take his threat of annexation particularly seriously, it has destabilize the Canadian dollar pretty significantly, and the bigger thing doing that is the tariffs, which I do think everyone should take very seriously, even though I didn't a couple of months ago. The reason why I didn't a couple months ago is I had a hard time believing that American capital would risk its own supply chain, and that they really were actually calling the shots on most of this stuff. And they are in some ways. I mean, Musk intervening on the H-1 visas actually indicates there is a limit to certain elements of MAGA populism, no matter what Steve Bannon thinks. And Steve Bannon's lost that fight before. If we remember, he was ousted in the first administration fairly quickly. But what does this actually mean? I mean, it radically destabilizes even the attempt to friendshore. If you were trying to reshore up Fortress North America to friendshore stuff and production back to North America, and including the U.S., this is actually pretty dramatic acceleration, which destabilizes the ability to do that with our 2 closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. And by 2 closest trading partners, I do not mean in like the finished product sense. I mean in the sense of actually producing capital itself, which is done through a lot of raw goods going across the Canadian and U.S. border. Now, part of this may be some maverick stuff with energy prices, but I've heard people try to predict this as 40-dimensional chess before. And sometimes we just might have to take statements on face value that Trump might mean it. The question is, does he really have the capacity to do it? What has become clear is that he has remade his party. The old Republic, the old GOP after Bush seems to be dead. And one of the, I think symbolically, if you looked at the events recently, when Obama was hanging out with Trump, and then George Bush showed hostility to Trump in those pictures, there does seem to be some kind of symbolism to that, that does belie almost in a spectacular way a kind of truth about where we are. I think we have to take a bigger deal out of the threats to Mexico, because that's got more talk in the Senate and the House behind it. But it's hard to know. I mean, we're talking about a person who's also beginning to say he will acquire emergency powers to do all kinds of things that haven't been done in the presidency before through emergency powers. And this is a trend, to be fair to Trump, that has been increasing in U.S. life since the Clinton administration, and definitely accelerated it in the Bush administration. And it's not like Obama nor Biden really wanted to completely undo unitary executive privilege, because they also benefited from it. You know, back to get to something Cuba said, and then I'll shut up for a while on this continuity thing. There is a way in which I think this was kind of unfortunately inevitable when the liberal world order under Bretton Woods didn't come up with a universal currency, and we still relied on national currencies backed by stated gold reserves that made this somewhat inevitable. Keynes's Bancor did not happen because obviously it was a threat to the national sovereignty of almost every state in the Bretton Woods Agreement. But if it had happened, it would have changed a lot of the calculations on what these natures could utilize as far as soft power by the 60s and 70s. And that would have actually probably had an effect even domestically, because it would have discouraged deindustrialization in some ways, because part of what led to deindustrialization was leverage about the currency. I don't have a good answer to any of this, nor do I have a clear way to say we know what Trump's going to do. The one thing I can say about Trump is there is a sense that he throws everything in the kitchen sink at the wall, and also his coalitions constantly shift. But what it does mean, and what it has meant in a way that I think we do have to ask ourselves a little bit, the first Trump administration, despite what everyone in the streets was saying, was not that out of line with prior American norms. This current Trump administration, if we are to take his current statement seriously, is a total rebuke to the status quo, including the status quo of the prior Trump administration. And it puts everyone in a weird position of defending a status quo that no one really believes is viable anymore, for reasons that have to do with nothing involving Trump, although that led to him. And I don't think there's not an easy answer to that. And if I was Canada, I don't know what I'd be doing right now, because Cuba's right. Canada has been a loyal a junior partner forever, even when it wasn't really in his interest. Yeah, it's not getting rewarded for it that well right now. Everybody in North America was probably thinking we were going to have Fortress North America in this realignment, and now we're talking about 51st states. The kind of jokes I used to make to rib my Canadian friends who were my Canadian nationalist friends who always thought America was secretly thinking about taking them over. And
not secretly.
Now it's not so secret anymore.
It's out in the open, man. It's like,
I mean, Trump says he won't use military on Canada. That's the only that's the only group he said he won't use military for. But
because they have good weights.
I think that the moving from the gentleman's agreement of the Western community, the transatlantic community, however you want to put it, to a position where everyone is just subject to either economic or direct military coercion, and not just to bend and shift on policy issues, not for a UN vote, but over territorial sovereignty. Well, at that point, at best, we're back to a world of spheres of influence where regional hegemons create explicitly imperial structures over explicitly subject peoples. And this is not an unusual condition, given the long span of world history, but one which inevitably leads to a great deal of interstate conflict, as well as the use of force against millions of people just to maintain the arbitrary power at the center of the system. There's a reason why it was considered an evolution in the maintenance of hegemony to have a regular rules-based order, that America, at the peak of its power, didn't want to change borders, didn't want to absorb new territories as states or dependencies, right? Much better to have an order of de jure sovereign states, which you could be at the center of, one where there's some flexibility and and at least the fig leaf of local self-determination. But this is not just blowing up the structures of American hegemony, but it may fatally undermine the basis of American hegemony, right? The middle powers might get a better deal from Russia, might get a better deal from China than offered by the United States. And you have many elites inside the United States that have benefited from the rules-based international order, don't see a reason to abandon it in favor of these harebrained MAGA schemes, and don't see what you even get out of ludicrous, kind of quixotic venture into Greenland, or trying to redo the Panama Canal Zone.
Derek?
Oh, I mean, it's when we ask ourselves what we're looking at today, we have a couple problems. One, I mean, it's not going to surprise anyone, but there is no meaningful left policy apparatus, and basically what you're dealing with is a quixotic, is a irascible realignment versus a irascible one. But we have to ask ourselves why there is no left policy apparatus, because it's the idea that this is just about like, there's no money in it. There's not a lot of super big elite people who are going to support left stuff. Although there was a lot of people willing to do so on cultural issues from 2016 to 2020 that aren't willing to do so now. And what we have to ask is why? Like what failed? Why is it that the tech oligarchs switch the ring that they're kissing? They all have. Why did they do that? I have my theories on that. I think it has to do with the fact that they see that they've gotten up the ladder with government contracts and whatnot, have set up monopsony powers, and after COVID can pretty much kick the ladder away. And that's what a lot of this is. And then the left have to ask itself, is so much that it mattered at all, why was it supporting tech oligarchs doing Democratic Party bidding in ways that benefited no one but the Democratic Party's executive ultimately? And you have to ask, like, why was there so much delusion about all this? I mean, we are still hearing Biden saying he would have beat Trump. I can't think of anything more ridiculous given what the Democrats did to themselves. I mean, we are literally at a point where Trump's negatives personally did not go down in the American public, and he still won a lot of the people who said they disliked him. Why? Why did the left, in so much that there ever is a left in this fucking country, which is an ultimately debatable question, but even the international left, not just the left in the US, why did it have no answer to this? Why have we always seemingly been stuck in defending a status quo that sucks and trying to gaslight people about it? Because that makes this harebrained demagogic bullshit a lot more popular, because it looks like a way out. But like Cuba, I'm surprised that we haven't seen more elite pushback. The question is why. And we can say the Dems have no vision, or Biden is senile and stupid, and that's all probably true. It doesn't change why it is, because a question that's been on my mind this whole time is we saw left populist movements emerge all over the world in the last 15 years. And in almost every scenario, and not just in the Anglophone world, it wasn't just an English speaker thing. They capitulated to the status quo in ways that illegitimated themselves. And this is what's left. And if we think this is just going to be an America thing, I think that's clearly false. A lot of this is about Trump's own personality, the chaos mongering of it is, but you're going to, like, how long does Macron hold out in France? How long do you have EU right populists who continue to assess to NATO norms if the US isn't even going to do it? Like, there's no, I mean, like, we saw the Germans. All it took was a little problem from Russia and their gas getting a little bit more precarious, and they became basically an ungovernable coalition, with the SPD, the Greens, and the Delenko falling apart fairly quickly. And now it looks like the ADF could possibly be a serious force in German politics. And we can't say this is all about anti-democratic movements or anything, because these quote anti-democratic movements are democratically popular. Well, the question is why? Because I think that's part of what's egging on the chaos from Trump. I mean, he's always done some of this, but the level of it is
this is my next question for you, Derek, and I'm sorry if I cut you off. I wasn't trying to be rude.
No, it's okay.
That I'm rude?
Mm-mm. You're not rude, I'm rude.
Trump's madman tactics, are they genuinely strategic, or are they a flailing gesture of a leader obsessed with attention? What are the implications of unpredictability as a foreign policy tool?
It's unpredictable, and I think Cuba can speak to that. I mean, it just makes it hard for anyone to gauge who their alliances are going to be. It's going to make everyone paranoid, because even if you don't act off it, markets and investors and whatnot do.
Similarly, how do you plan for the next cycle of investment, the next political program, the next 5 years, 10 years down the road, when you have the country that is supposed to be the steward and guarantor of the international economy threatening to knock it all over, or come in and take your stuff? The climate for investment, especially cross-border international flows, that is, it's never been worse. This type of uncertainty is the worst possible condition for any type of strategic planning, private sector or public sector. And frankly, it makes the PRC look good and the Belt and Road Initiative much more attractive, because the Chinese don't do this kind of crap.
No, they don't. Although we do have to deal with the fact that Belt and Road Initiative has been stalled since the Ukraine war, and there's 30% unemployment in China. But this could actually help undo a lot of that. I don't know. 30% youth unemployment, not general unemployment. Let me be very specific on that. The Chinese do look like the more responsible actor. The one thing I will say, though, is we normally focus on Europe as a bellwether for where all this goes, and Europe is increasingly less relevant. And I know Cuba may agree or disagree with me, but like India, China, Russia is where a lot of the movement is outside of the United States. And It's unclear to me, you know, what I mean. I know that certain tariffs that Trump has been threatening on the PRC would be bad for the PRC, but they have been gearing up for decoupling because, I mean, frankly, that was true with the Democrats too. It's not like they weren't also picking up on all this stuff, and that goes all the way back to Obama. You know, the first gambit in forced decoupling wasn't thrown by Xi; it was thrown by Obama. But you know, I mean, ask all those regimes in the Middle East that play ball as black sites, and that included Syria and Iran, what reward they got for it. And it becomes a lot more clear if that kind of mentality is now everyone on the planet. I mean, in some ways it's fair, but you're going to have the similar instabilities. And I also think there's going to be a lot more maneuvering between other countries, because I mean, one of the things that I think doesn't get talked about enough when people talk about multipolarity is that eventually Russia, China, and India have divergent interests since they're the three big powers right by each other. And historically, they've always had problems for that reason. So,
well, I think that be that as it may, right? In some ways, I think that Russia, China, and India, the core of sort of Eastern Eurasia, yes, there were issues around the border, but with increasing economic integration, the border of Russia and China looks less and less like the dividing line between power blocks and more like the Canadian-US border in its heyday. There are economic complementarities to these three powers. China is an alternative source for manufactured goods and high-tech products. It requires the raw resources and energy coming out of Russia and, to a certain extent, India, as well as passage connection to Western Eurasia and Iran. It could very well be that the replacement to a rules-based international order is rules-based regional orders, plural, with bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, you name the polygon, associations of countries creating mechanisms for regular economic exchange or exchange of people, goods, finance, that will operate without US or Western participation and not claim to be a global system. Then you end up with the challenge of trying to create a system of systems, or taking multipolarity to its logical conclusion, you have conflicts between these systems over which one will establish itself as the global operating structure. I think that there's as much room for, just as this conflict that Trump is drumming up between Canada, the United States, the EU, the core powers of the Western Atlantic Alliance, just as this unexpectedly resonates, so too there could be unexpected affinities and a foundation for cooperation between India, China, Russia.
Agreed.
Well, guys, we're coming up on the hour, and I do have one last question. And sadly, Pascal was having some video and audio issues, so I've been speaking with him off air, trying to see if we can fix those. If the rules-based order is a facade, what does the future of global power look like? Is MAGAfest destiny merely an acceleration of America's decline, or does it represent a viable, if chaotic, path forward? Cooper, I know you want to say something.
Mm.
You look too serious not to say something.
So I think that the alternative to some sort of global integration is regional blocks. And that's what Trump's gesture is pointing to, right? The Panama Canal, Canada, Greenland, secure North America, Central America as the Monroe Doctrine heartland for American exploitation. That would be up against a second bloc in Eurasia. Who knows what the Europeans do? Maybe they cut a deal with Russia. Maybe they try to create their own system with partners in the Middle East or Africa. Although, given the eviction that French forces have experienced in West Africa, that's less and less likely. But I think that that's long-term viable, but in the short to medium term, Russia managed to get through the sanctions regime that was imposed on it due to the war because it had a strong real economy. It has plenty of agricultural land, it has plenty of industry, it has plenty of workers. You mobilize them towards war ends, and you have enough stuff, you have enough people to produce what you need. The US, I don't know how you get the real economy working in North America without the rest of the global economy. You would need to have more resource extraction, you would need to have more manufacturing, requiring a type of investment, a type of company, and a type of worker that has been on its way towards extinction ever since the end of the Cold War and the offshoring of basic industry to China. So I think that the vision may be for regional power blocks, but if Trump attempts that, it's going to be such a mess in North America that it will represent a kind of, if not a sunset, then at least an eclipse of US power globally. And we'll see how that plays out, right? To what extent other powers step up and replace it, and to what extent we have to go through a period of conflict, warfare, and adjustment, and violent adjustment, before we reach a different point of stability.
Derek Vaughan, is this a rules-based order facade, or is MAGAfest destiny the way to go moving forward? Or is it going to be the way to go? Not is it the way to go?
I mean, that's hard to say. I agree with Kuba about a lot of this with a few caveats. One, if you read Hans Morgenthau and E.H. Carr, and those are the two old theorists of multipolarity, and those are the people you should be reading, not people who just throw the fucking word around. You realize that there's a couple of ways this could go. You could have stable regional blocks, which for all the middle and small powers, by the way, does still mean imperialism. It's just with different languages at dominant. The implication that Cuba's been hinting at, though, is the small powers would like to appeal to hegemons that give them better deals far away. And of course, they're more likely to give them better deals far away because it expands the core of a different multipolar block to another area and expands their resource base at the expense of another multipolar block. I hate to tell you what that historically means, but usually those countries don't stay independent for very long. And I'm not just talking about, like, the way we have it today where countries kiss ass to a block and they're only nominally independent. I mean, they de facto and de jure are no longer independent. That's how the powers that you're seeing, Russia, China, and all, those are all empires. They're not little nation states like in Europe. They were born of empires. You know, we were the empire of liberty. China was literally an empire, and Russia was the imperial Russia until it was made into a nation state by the Bolsheviks. So India was made into a nation state by the Raj. We have to ask ourselves then what that actually means. If we have made things unstable, because in some sense, that was the implication of Biden's friendshoring too. It was just a nicer, more stable way. It's like devolving from England versus rebelling from England. The end result's pretty similar, but how you got there and how much blood your hands are bathed in on the way is pretty different. And I think Cuba asked the right question. In terms of raw resources, people, America's got a lot. All right. We actually have enough. We could be food secure if we wanted to be. We could be relatively manufacturing secure if all of North America is integrated in a block and you're willing to get a lot of your rare minerals from places you don't want to get it. I mean, I hate to tell you, there's a lot of those needed rare minerals under Brooklyn. But that would mean a massive rearrangement. The other thing that it risks is a centralized global currency, which fundamentally changes everything. Now, it might change everything for the better in the long run. In fact, I kind of think it would. But in the short run, it's going to be weird. But the biggest problem for the United States is that what you see being promised right now is no immigration, relatively low birth weights, which you're going to have a hard time reversing, given the age of the society already. No new taxation, and not a lot of industrial spending. And you want to re-industrialize. How the fuck do you do that? All those things come directly at odds with each other. And if you want to know what it looks like when you don't do that and try to pretend that you're still a major power, look at Britain. It's basically what Argentina was before Milei came to power. And it did that in less than a decade.
Oof. And people were excited about Malay for like 5 minutes. Kuba, you look more upset than usual. When Derek Varn has giggled and smiled more than you on a stream, I'm worried just a little bit.
Well, it's just been a day, right? But this topic too, and the flippancy with which people are discussing this insanely aggressive package of promises, threats that Trump has made. I'm concerned that we were trending this way for a long time, but the last restraints on the worst case scenario are gradually being whittled down. And it would have been bad enough if old-timey America were involved in conflict around the world like it has been. But if things start breaking down within the core of the American zone, then, well, it's going to hit me, one. And two, who knows where it ends, right? Does it end up looking like is that reorganization right? That Varn talked about, the shift in structures of labor, structures of production, structures of resource extraction that you would need to get to that autarkic Fortress America vision. What type of government is going to bring that about? What are the mechanisms that they're going to use? When the Soviets needed to develop a material and industrial base for their military-industrial complex ahead of World War II, it was Stalinist 5-year plans, and it was the Gulag. It was forced labor. It was bad. It was very bad. Not only in the way that it works, but when it broke down, you had civil insurrection, large-scale violence. Now, I think that that type of outcome is so remote from the imagination of most of the people who live either in Canada or in the United States that perversely it makes it all the more likely that we may end up there.
Yep.
Sleepwalk into it just because everyone's sick of the liberal system and the way that it's broken down, and enough so that even people who should know better talk about how Greenland is rightfully ours.
I have students writing papers about it.
Mm.
And like you made them read about it, or they came at you like
It was just it was. I'm not.
Really?
I don't. We don't talk about foreign policy in fucking school. That's too dangerous.
Well, you're also in high school, so I mean, how deep does a foreign policy discussion get? I'm not shitting on your students, but
No, you go ahead. No, I mean, like I say this because I think this high school student today is the same as high school student in the last 200 years, despite
Sure.
what people hear when I talk about the current problems of today.
Mhm.
But these are the people that you want to transform into a viable workforce, and both industrially and not. And you're talking about people who have never really done even basic schoolwork, much less have to go without food. So, and that's despite the fact there's food insecurity in the US, but you're not talking about those kinds of people right now, are you? When we look at, I mean, I don't think people realize what 20% tariffs on everything would actually mean, and not just for us. And basically, the gambit on that is if we are cutting off enough of the world's supply that everyone falls into chaos, and that we hopefully have enough here not to. And the issue with us is, frankly, internal and people. If you look at our geography, if you look at our power capacity, we should not be having the problems that we have. But the American subject has been allowed to be so fucking degraded in almost every aspect of life
Mhm.
that, you know, and this is what I think is interesting about the kind of heat this is going to bring on. Let's say that the heat, you know, because basically what you will hear from a lot of you know, the more cynical leftists is nothing will ever change.
Mhm.
Motherfucker, this whole world's only been this way for 60 years.
Mhm.
We are just out of the lifespan of the people who remember when this world was not this way.
Before there were suburbs.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that is still in living memory. And yet we have naturalized it as if that's going to be the eternal world. Even if you're optimistic, I don't think people have, you know, if you want these people to argue, oh, this will be good, it might be good. It might actually be good in the long run compared to now. I don't know. But here's one thing I can bet on, that it's going to be so destabilizing that most of what we know won't exist if we continue going down this way. What does that mean? We don't know. We didn't know. And we did this 100 years ago. It rewrote the entire planet. Like, or have we forgotten? Because most of the World War II veterans are dead. Because this is the kind of shit that does that.
Mhm.
And if we go to that point, populations matter, and we don't have it. And
Which is
people
why
will
you
be
need the robots, right?
right. That's why we've been relying on drones.
I know some people have been saying this is a bit of a depressing conversation since the last 2 days. I did special streams about music with everyone's favorite non-Anglo pessimist, Daniel Besner. And then I interviewed the guitar player from Every Time I Die. You familiar with that band, Derek?
Yeah. Daniel Besner tends to be depressing even about pop culture.
He wasn't this time.
Okay.
He wasn't this time.
Because every time I ever talk to him, he's like, this is dead. That is dead. This is also dead. And I'm like, man, you sound more of a downer than me. He's like the happiest person I know. I don't know how you were this happy. And also like
married a child.
Yeah, he's like perfectly normal individual. And yet like everything is just like when you mention any ideology to him, left or right, he's just like, why are people that stupid? And I'm like, I'm just saying what people believe, man.
Yeah, he was in better spirits, I would say. But you know, I don't think this was a conversation that was going to be happy, you know. And Pascal, like I said, Pascal is upset that he got kicked off and couldn't come back on. I do have some videos for you guys that I found that I hope make you laugh for the champagne room. Kuba's not even cracking a half smile.
It's probably going to confirm my general feeling that society is breaking down, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you guys, some of the stuff you guys are like, you can laugh like, haha, that must be bad for those people that aren't in loving, happy relationships like Jason.
I got married, motherfucker. I don't have a
I
problem.
know, that's we're all happy.
Market.
Oh, look at those people getting dumped. Must be bad for them.
Did someone have a divorce I don't know about?
No,
Anyway.
I'm just alone. I'm just alone, Derek.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason.
But no, I found some stuff that I think will be entertaining and informative. Maybe Pascal will be able to join us for the champagne room. We'll see. My fingers are crossed. Thank you guys for watching on TIR, and thank you guys for watching on Varn Vlog. Thank you, Kuba. Thank you, Varn, for agreeing to do this. This was kind of a last minute thing. I was going to take the evening off. And then I was like, oh no, we got Kuba on a roll right now. The Ask Kuba Anything show was a lot of fun. We got Derek Varn out of live stream retirement. For a second, we even had Pascal on the screen. We had the gang was all here.
We just needed Gene.
Oh, we got to wait on him, man. It's snowing over there. It's
snowing over here.
Mm-hmm. Some say the world will end in ice. Some say fire.
If the world will end in fire, the ocean's boiling into flame.
Fucking Kuba. God damn. Okay. If you are a patron, the link is already up. If you are a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up to join us in the champagne room. Derek, do I need to send the link to your patrons?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll send the link to patrons. So if you are a patron of Derek Varn's show, shortly you will have a link to the champagne room for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You too can have access to these uncensored and insane champagne rooms that we have. You can hear Derek Varn create new racial slurs that still to this day are uttered only in the champagne room because they're so racisty that we just can't say them on the main show. So if you want to have fun with that, there's only one way. And you can try it out for free. That's right. Wherever you're watching or listening to the show, go to the description. There's a link. Try it out for free. Let us know what you think or don't. We don't care. That being said, we are out. See you guys soon. Or not. Now I will.